The winter sun hung low over the Bosporus, casting a pale shimmer across the water as the imperial galley cut its way through the current. Its hull was black, the sails heavy with the embroidered crescent of the Sultan, and the oars moved with the steady rhythm of trained slaves. From the deck, Istanbul loomed like a dream carved in stone, domes and minarets rising in a glittering skyline, walls older than memory, the scent of spice and smoke riding on the wind. To the world, it was the jewel of the empire. To those who lived within the palace walls, it was a place where beauty and terror walked hand in hand. She had never seen anything like it. Eileen clutched her mother's scarf in her trembling hands, her breath misting in the cold. She was 15, the daughter of a small-town weaver from the foothills of Anatolia, and she had been told she was chosen for honor beyond her dreams. Chosen to serve in the court of Sultan Mehmed for himself. Her father's voice had been full of pride when the soldiers came, but his eyes would not meet hers. Her mother wept silently that night, pressing an amulet into Eileen's palm and whispering, "Do not lose this. And do not lose yourself." The palace gates were taller than anything she imagined, iron and gold entwined like a net to hold back the world. Inside, gardens stretched in every direction, fountains sang with crystal water, and peacocks wandered as though they owned the stones beneath their feet. Eunuchs in silk robes guided her forward, their faces unreadable. They walked past open courtyards where janissaries drilled with gleaming spears, past shadowed corridors lit by oil lamps, past doorways where veiled women peeked from behind lattice screens. When they reached the harem, the air changed. The scent of rosewater and musk clung to the air, heavy and almost sweet enough to hide the undercurrent of fear. The door shut behind her with a hollow echo. Here, time seemed to slow. Women of every shade and age moved like wraiths in the long hall, some laughing softly, some silent, all watching. She realized they were not free to come and go. This was a cage gilded so brightly, it blinded those who looked from outside. The mistress of the harem, a tall woman with eyes like polished onyx, studied her as if she were a piece of porcelain. "You are fortunate," the woman said in a voice as smooth as velvet but cold beneath. "The Sultan favors beauty, and yours will serve you well. But beauty fades. Learn quickly, obey without question, and you may survive long enough to see your hair turn silver." That night, she lay in a chamber lined with cushions, listening to the whispers that slid through the dark. Girls spoke in tongues she half understood, Persian, Greek, Arabic, Russian, all carrying the same stories. The Sultan's favor was life itself, but his displeasure was death in all but name. Some had been here for years without seeing his face, others disappeared after a single evening and were never spoken of again. The women who smiled the most were often the ones whose eyes were empty. Days turned to weeks, and Eileen learned the rules. Walk with grace, never hurry. Speak only when addressed. Never look a man in the eye unless he is the Sultan. And above all, never refuse an order from the Kisler Aga, the chief black eunuch, whose word was law in the harem. His shadow seemed to fall over everything, a reminder that every step was watched. It was on her third month that she was summoned for the first time to the Sultan's private chambers. The eunuchs bathed her in water scented with amber, dressed her in silk the color of midnight, and painted her lips the shade of pomegranates. As they led her through corridors that grew quieter with each turn, her heart pounded against her ribs. At the threshold of a vast room lit by golden lamps, she knelt and pressed her forehead to the carpet. The Sultan's voice was soft, almost kind. "Lift your head," he said, and she obeyed. He was younger than she expected, his beard trimmed, his eyes sharp, a man who carried himself like the empire itself rested on his shoulders. He asked her name, where she came from, what she could do. She spoke carefully, the amulet warm in her palm, and when he smiled, she felt both relief and dread. She left that night untouched, but with a gift of a single gold coin enough to feed her family for a year. In the harem, such a gift was a sign. The Sultan had noticed her. That was when the other dangers began. Jealousy was poison here, and poison was not just a metaphor. Another girl, a Georgian with eyes like frost, began to shadow her every move. Eileen heard the older women murmur warnings, gifts from rivals should never be eaten, kind words were often knives wrapped in silk. One evening, she woke to find her pillow soaked through with the scent of crushed poppies, a sleeping draught, left by hands unseen. One morning, the mistress of the harem called her aside. "There are doors in this palace you must never open," she said. and there are truths you must never seek. But if you must survive, you will learn to listen for what is not spoken. That night, she heard it, a faint sound beyond the lattice of her chamber window. A voice, low and urgent, speaking in a tongue she barely knew. She crept to listen, heart racing, and caught only fragments. The prince, hidden, if he lives. The voice stopped when footsteps approached, and she slipped back to her cushions, feigning sleep. The following week, she discovered the first secret. Behind one of the forbidden doors in the western wing lay a small courtyard with no windows. And there, through a narrow slit in the wall, she saw a boy no older than 12, dressed not in the silks of a prince, but in plain linen. His hair was the same black as the sultan's. When he looked up, his eyes were full of a hunger she could not name, a hunger not for food but for the world he could not reach. The days that followed blurred into a strange routine. Every morning, Isla would rise before the call to prayer, her hair brushed and her body bathed by the silent handmaidens who never spoke unless directly addressed. They dressed her in silks lighter than air, the colors changing daily, from deep crimson that seemed to pulse like a heartbeat, to pale blue that mirrored the Bosphorus at dawn. But no matter the beauty of the fabrics, Isla felt them as chains rather than clothing. She was taught to walk without making a sound, to lower her gaze before any man of rank, and to smile in a way that revealed both obedience and allure. In the afternoons, she was made to practice dances to the soft strum of the oud, her hands moving like smoke in the air. The instructor's eyes were sharp, every misplaced step earned her a whispered reprimand that cut deeper than a shout. One evening, she was summoned to a chamber she had never seen before. The walls were tiled in blue and gold patterns, and in the center sat an elderly eunuch, his skin pale and stretched thin like parchment over bone. He introduced himself only as Hassan Aga. "You are to understand," he began in a voice that seemed to echo inside her skull, "that here, survival depends on silence. The walls hear everything, and the walls speak to those who command them." Isla dared to ask, "Why was I brought here?" The old man smiled, but it wasn't warmth, it was pity. "Because beauty like yours is a currency, and the Sultan pays in lives." That night, Isla could not sleep. She heard footsteps in the corridors long after the lamps were extinguished. Somewhere far away, a woman was weeping, a low, broken sound that was abruptly silenced, as if someone had pressed a hand over her mouth. Isla pulled the blanket tighter around herself, wondering if she was next. The first time she saw the Sultan, it was by accident. She had been sent with a tray of pomegranates to the outer court, where foreign dignitaries were being received. The Sultan stood at the far end, dressed in robes heavy with gold thread. His beard was neatly trimmed, his eyes dark and unreadable. But it wasn't his presence alone that unsettled her, it was the way everyone else seemed to shrink in his presence, as though the very air bent to his will. He glanced at her once, and that single look felt like a command she could not disobey. Later that week, she was told she would be presented to him formally. The handmaidens worked on her for hours, painting her eyes with kohl, braiding her hair with pearls. When they finished, she barely recognized herself in the polished bronze mirror. She entered the Sultan's private chamber on trembling legs. The air smelled of rosewater and burning amber. The Sultan reclined on a divan, his gaze fixed on her as she approached. "You are Isla," he said, his voice deep, almost soothing. "Your name means moonlight. I will remember it." She lowered her head, as she had been taught. "It is my honor, my Sultan." His lips curved into the faintest smile. "Honor can be a dangerous thing here." From that moment, Isla became part of the Sultan's inner harem. But with the elevation came a cage far tighter than before. She could no longer leave her quarters without an escort. Every word she spoke was noted, every glance measured. Other women in the harem watched her with a mixture of envy and hate, for each believed themselves destined to be the Sultan's favorite, and Isla's arrival had shifted the balance. It was Fatima, a tall and regal woman with emerald eyes, who first warned her. "Do not think being favored will protect you. Favorites are like spring flowers, beautiful, admired, and quickly replaced. But those who fall from favor," she let the sentence hang, but her meaning was clear. Weeks passed, and Isla began to notice the disappearances. One day, a girl would be laughing in the baths, and the next, her bed would be stripped bare, her name never spoken again. When Isla asked where they had gone, the handmaidens would only say, "They have been sent away." But there was something in their eyes that told her the truth was far darker. Her suspicions grew one rainy night, when she awoke to the sound of muffled screams. Slipping from her bed, she crept to the small lattice window that overlooked the courtyard. There, by the dim light of a lantern, she saw two eunuchs dragging a struggling girl toward a hidden door in the palace wall. The girl's silk robe was torn, her hair tangled, her mouth gagged. Isla's heart pounded as the door shut behind them, swallowing her whole. The next morning, no one mentioned the girl's name. It was as though she had never existed. Isla tried to focus on her lessons, on the dances, on pleasing the Sultan when summoned, but the image of that door haunted her. And then, one evening, she saw it again. This time, the girl being taken was Fatima. Isla's breath caught. Fatima did not struggle. She walked between the eunuchs with her head held high, but her eyes, were pools of resignation. Before disappearing through the door, she turned slightly, her gaze meeting Isla's for the briefest moment. And in that moment, Isla understood, Fatima had known this was coming all along. The palace seemed colder after that. The other women whispered more than ever, their eyes darting toward the hidden door whenever footsteps echoed at night. Isla began to count the days, wondering when her turn would come. But then came the night when the Sultan summoned her not to his chamber, but to a place she had never seen before, a narrow corridor deep within the palace, lit only by flickering oil lamps. Hassan Aga awaited her there. "This is the heart of the palace," he said quietly. "Few are permitted to see it." They stopped before a massive iron door, its surface carved with patterns that seemed to twist in the torchlight. Hassan unlocked it with a key that looked older than the palace itself. Beyond was darkness. And within that darkness, something moved.